This is Gary Johnson, and today is June 9, 2011. We're at the Chicago History Museum, and could you please give us your name for the record?
My name is Anne Burke.
Anne Burke, thank you very much, Justice Burke. And just to help other researchers, have you ever done an oral history before that you can remember?
I don't think so.
So, okay. Because if you had, then that would be something that we could point other scholars to. Mm-hmm. And if you could just give us a very brief rundown of your career before we turn to the era of Richard J. Daley.
Yes. Well, I grew up in Chicago. I was born in 1944, the youngest of 4 children of Helen and George McClone. I had a brother George, who would be 82 now, a sister Pat, who would have been 80 now, and I do have a brother John, who's 78, and myself, who is 67. And we lived on the southeast side until I was about 10, and that's in the neighborhood of Kenwood, 47th and Ingleside. We moved to the Gage Park area, 63rd and California, and I went to St. Rita Grammar School, Maria High School, and I went to 1 year George Williams College to major in physical education in 1962. However, the school actually moved to the suburbs, Downers Grove, and so I dropped out of school in 1963, but I kept on working with children in the Chicago Park District at that time. And then I got married in 1968 to Edward Burke, who was just finishing law school and was a Chicago policeman. And we had our first child in 1970, and in 1971 he sent me back to college. So I went to DePaul University, School for New Learning, to receive my undergrad degree in teaching. Graduated in 1976, and when I graduated, by then I had 3 children. Had another child in 76 and waited another 4 years before I started law school. And when I graduated, well, actually when I started law school, I had 4 children under 10. And finished in 1983 from Illinois Institute of Technology, Chicago-Kent College of Law. Started a neighborhood law practice on the Chicago South Side, 51st and Washtenaw, storefront office. Then went on to different judicial positions and to the position I'm in now.
Thank you very much. We'll come back to all those stages down the road. Why don't we talk about the era of Richard J. Daley a long time ago? Did you ever meet Mayor Daley?
Oh, yes. Ed and I, my husband and I, started dating in about 1965. And he was going to law school, just finishing up law school at DePaul, he graduated undergrad at DePaul University, and we started dating. I was working for the parks, and his dad was a Chicago alderman at the time. And Ed actually was good friends of all the Daleys growing up, contemporaries, his father, and with Richard J. Daley, and all the Daleys, contemporaries of my husband. So there were a lot of parties that we all attended together. And I was in the basement of the Daley Emerald Street home with the pipes up above, and it was just a regular basement in a Chicago bungalow, and kids did what they did in parties at the time. And he was very paternal to all his kids and, of course, all his kids' friends. So, being young adults, he was a wonderful man.
So, professionally, did you have opportunities to meet him when you worked with the Park District, for example?
Absolutely. By then, I was working for the Park District, and Ed and I were engaged, and we were married in 1968. However, just the year before the Special Olympic Games at Soldier Field, Mayor Daley endorsed it, embraced the idea of having special needs children, and at that time, retarded children participate in an event at Soldier Field. But in 1965, he also endorsed the idea of having special needs children and adults in the Chicago Park District, in which I became very involved in. So he had been very involved with President McFetridge of the Park District and a numbers. He'd come out to the park and he'd seen the special children. And so when it came time in 1967, just before the games, we had a lot of interaction together because I ran the games in the Chicago area. Mrs. Shriver was, Eunice Kennedy Shriver was a good friend of the mayor and her husband, our Sergeant Shriver. So it was really going to be, and we could see that Chicago was going all out. The mayor absolutely called on many of his friends to help with the busing for the special kids, for lunches at Soldier Field for the special kids. The hotel arrangements were made at the LaSalle Hotel, the Olympic Village, so to speak, for the special children. And he made a couple phone calls when people didn't come through as we thought they were going to come through, and I had occasion to go see the mayor and give him an update. He actually said to me, when I couldn't get the gentleman who was supposed to provide us with boxed lunches, 1,000 lunches or 1,500 lunches, he called that gentleman, and I won't use names, but he said, well, you have the concessions for the Park District, don't you, Mr. So-and-so, you know? And I was sitting in the room, and Mr. Burns, I did give away the name, said, oh yes, we will have definitely we will have those lunches there.
Well, I guess that's one definition of clout, isn't it? That's one of the questions I was going to ask is, what's the role of clout in the administration of the late Mayor Daley? There's a good example, the charitable use of clout. The
charitable use of clout, and this was for children. If there was anything for children, I can recall over the years that he would do anything and help. You know, and not be abrasive about it or forceful or anything like that, but make firm suggestions that everybody should help. This is Chicago, these are special kids, or even if they weren't just special children, let's all help. That Chicagoans should participate in. Another interesting little story was we were receiving a letter from the International Olympic Committee that said we could not use the word Olympics, which Avery Brundage was the executive director, the head of the International Olympic Committee.
And he, of course, was a Chicagoan.
He was Chicagoan. He owned the LaSalle Hotel across the street from City Hall. So I was in tears again, and I went to see the mayor, and he wanted an update, and I said, we can't use the name Olympics, and this is what it is. The Greeks started the Olympics. You know, I mean, this isn't something that should be patented for someone else's use. So the mayor picked up the phone and he called Mr. Brundage and he said, Avery, Richard here, and just wanted to talk to you about the letter that came to President McFetridge about the use of the word Olympics for our special children that it's going to take place this summer in July of 1968. And I don't know what was on the other end, what was said on the other end by Mr. Brundage. However, I did hear Mayor Daley say, you know, I've walked through that LaSalle Hotel recently, and it seems like the fire codes might not be adhered to. Do you think the firemen should go over there and inspect? No problem. So in today, here we are, 2011, only Special Olympics can use the word Olympics when it comes to athletic competition in the world.
That's absolutely fascinating. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that that event that began in Chicago has not only had a tremendous impact on the lives of those involved around the world, but it's actually changed the world because it's helped to change attitudes.
Absolutely. I mean, we're not talking about people with disabilities anymore. We're talking about people with abilities. And it's our responsibility as individuals in our community to learn how to work with people with abilities. How do they learn? We have to teach them so they can fulfill their greatest potential and be contributing members in society. So it's kind of a reversal. As education has grown up in America anyway, and across the world, there's one teacher and everybody has to conform. Well, we know that isn't fair, it's not right, not everybody can conform the same way in a classroom. So it's our goal and responsibility as a society to learn how people can do things.
Well, what was your own first contact with these special children?
Well, as a phys ed teacher for the Park District, as I suggested earlier, that I was a student at George Williams College, which was the old YMCA college. It was the university that prepared YMCA physical education teachers for WISE and schools, and also for social work. And that's where I went. And I was a scholarship winner actually for a year at that school before I had to leave. But I was able to have enough credits to stay with the Park District to continue teaching. And in '65 is when the Kennedy Foundation, Eunice Shriver's foundation, gave $10,000. It doesn't seem like a lot of money now, but in 1965, $10,000 was a lot of money. It was to be used to open 10 facilities in the Chicago Park District teaching kids with disabilities. Now, mind you, in 1965, there was no special education for kids with disabilities. There was no House Bill 1407 or any of that. And so this was really kind of the first coming out in the Chicago area, anyway, of children and parents who have kids or had children who were so-called mentally retarded. They were asked to bring their children to a public facility where they were going to have free recreation, learning how to swim, whatever we could teach them. And it really was amazing at that time that the Park District did that. So that was I was one of the 10 teachers.
And did you have any sort of special training for that? Today, you know, it's a specialty that people have.
Yes.
When they go to school, but back in those days.
All we were permitted to do, the Park District, using some of that $10,000, sent the 10 teachers down to Southern Illinois University, a place called Little Grassy. They had recreation majors for kids with disabilities. They had some sort of teaching program. So we actually spent 1 week only, but presumably we were phys ed teachers for the Park District, so all we were trained to do was to learn how to work with kids with disabilities. Some kids were blind, some kids were in wheelchairs, others couldn't hear. A lot of them had what we would call today emotional problems. But at that time, as a young woman, I was only 20, I had never seen a retarded person in my whole life. I mean, people actually kept their kids at home or placed them in an institution. So I had never seen a kid. So it wasn't until I got back to West Pullman Park at 123rd Street in Stewart in Chicago that I started advertising in the local papers. Parents, please come, I want to talk to you if you have a disabled child. And they came, and we talked about what we could do and go swimming and volunteers. And that was the first time I ever saw a retarded child. So that's the only training I had.